the news dropped on a Tuesday. Not a grand Monday declaration. Not a Friday release timed for the weekend cycle. A Tuesday, the most boring, forgettable day of the week, and, yet by noon, every journalist I knew had blown up my phone like the building was on fire. I was at my desk in Lagos, half eating a cold meat pie, scrolling through nothing in particular, when my colleague Adiz leaned over the partition between our desks and said, in that voice she uses when she already knows something and wants to watch your face when you find out, William and Catherine are coming here. I looked up. She wasn't blinking. Here as in Nigeria here? She set her phone down on my desk, screen facing up. The palace statement was maybe 4 sentences long. That's the thing about royal communications that always catches people off guard. You expect pages, formality, a whole architecture of language built to say almost nothing. Instead it was clean. Direct. The Prince and Princess of Wales would undertake a significant working visit to Nigeria. They would participate in cultural engagements, meet with youth leaders, attend a state reception. Their roles had been personally confirmed by the palace as central, not ceremonial. Central. Not ceremonial. I read that twice. I should tell you who I am so this makes sense. My name is Tabena. I've been a cultural correspondent for 9 years, based out of Lagos, and, in those 9 years I've covered everything from film festivals to political funerals to a wedding where the groom fainted 3 times before they finally got him to the altar. I've sat in press pools where nothing happened for 6 hours and, then, something happened so fast you missed it if you blinked wrong. But, I had never, not once, covered a British royal visit to this country. My mother had, in a manner of speaking. She was 12 years old when Princess Diana came to Nigeria in 1990, and she talked about it the way some people talk about the first time they heard a song that changed them. Not with nostalgia exactly. With something quieter. The specific memory of standing in a crowd that had gone completely, voluntarily still. Everyone just stopped, she told me once. Not because they were told to. Because they wanted to see. I thought about that a lot in the days after the announcement. Lagos did what Lagos does, it absorbed the news and immediately began processing it at full volume. By Wednesday morning, the conversation had already split into roughly 4 camps. There were the people who were genuinely moved, who saw the visit as something meaningful, a gesture between 2 countries carrying complicated history towards something that at least resembled acknowledgement. There were the people who were skeptical, arms folded, who wanted to see action not optics and were not wrong for wanting that. There were the people who didn't particularly care either way but were deeply invested in the fashion angle. Catherine's wardrobe choices were being debated on Instagram threads before the woman had even boarded a plane. And, then, there were the people like my editor, Folake, who saw it from the purely logistical angle. You're going to Abuja, she told me Thursday morning, not asking. State House reception, the youth forum in the morning, and whatever they put on the evening schedule. I want first person. I want the room. Not a press release rewrite, I want what the room smells like. I told her I'd pack that afternoon. She was already walking back to her office. I'd been to Abuja dozens of times but it always does the same thing to me on arrival, the width of it. Lagos eats you alive with its density, its mass, its refusal to give you any space that isn't already claimed by someone or something. Abuja breathes differently. The roads are wide. The sky feels higher. The city has a kind of deliberate calm that Lagos finds philosophically offensive. I checked into my hotel near Maitama and sat on the bed for a while with the curtains open, watching the light change over the skyline. There was a briefing for press that evening. A palace communications officer, young, British, the specific kind of polish that looks effortless but costs thousands of hours, walked us through the schedule with the steady warmth of someone defusing a bomb while making small talk. William would open with a formal engagement at the State House. Catherine would visit a maternal health initiative in the morning before they joined together for the youth forum in the afternoon. The evening reception was joint. Joint. Someone in the row ahead of me wrote that word down in their notebook and underlined it twice. I understood why. This wasn't a trip where one of them cut ribbons while the other held a polite conversation in a side room. The palace had been deliberate about this, the word they kept returning to was partnership. William and Catherine operating as a unit, each carrying equal weight in the engagements. It was the kind of framing that, if you were being cynical, you could read as performance. If you were being fair, you had to at least sit with the possibility that it meant something. That night I called my mother. She picked up before the second ring, which meant she'd been expecting me. "You're there," she said. "I'm here." A pause. The comfortable kind, the kind our family does without filling it. "Be present," she said finally. "Don't just cover it. Be there." I told her I would. I didn't sleep much. Outside the window, Abuja was doing its version of quiet, which still meant traffic, still meant generators, still meant the city breathing through the night the way cities do when they're getting ready for something. I lay in the dark and thought about the word prominent. The palace had used it specifically. Prominent roles. Not supporting. Not attending. Prominent. I kept turning the word over in my head like a coin, wondering what face it would land on. Morning came fast. The kind of fast that only happens when you've barely slept and the light comes in at an angle that feels personal. I showered, drank the worst coffee the hotel could manufacture with apparent pride, and got into the press vehicle at 6:45. The roads to the State House were already being cleared. I watched a security vehicle roll past the window, slow and deliberate, and felt something in my chest that I couldn't immediately name. Not excitement exactly. Something more like the feeling you get standing at the edge of something you know you'll remember. Before it's happened. That specific, slightly vertiginous moment of before. The driver glanced at me in the rearview. "Big day," he said. "Big day," I agreed. He nodded at the road. Ahead of us, the city was waking up for something it hadn't seen in a generation. The plane landed at 9:14 a.m. I wasn't at the airport, press positions had been assigned strictly, and I was in the pool designated for the State House arrival, which meant I got the footage feed on my phone and watched the same 15 seconds that the rest of the world watched: the steps, the light, the two figures emerging with the specific composure of people who have learned to walk slowly when everything in the world is moving fast around them. William in a light suit, no tie. That detail went through the press group like a small electrical current. No tie in a diplomatic context like this reads as intentional, a softening, a signal, the kind of studied informality that takes weeks of consideration to arrive at. Catherine in something that the fashion contingent would spend the rest of the day dissecting, a dress in a warm terracotta that, if you were standing there watching and not cataloging, just looked like someone who'd thought carefully about where she was going. The two of them stood at the top of the stairs for maybe 3 seconds. Just long enough. Then, they walked down together. The State House compound is a different world inside than the Abuja outside it. You can feel the temperature drop when you pass through the security perimeter, not literally, though the trees help, but in the atmosphere. Everything inside moves at the rhythm of state ceremony. Deliberate. Measured. The kind of choreography that's been rehearsed enough times it doesn't look rehearsed anymore. I was positioned in the press gallery off the main reception hall. Maybe 40 of us. Nigerian journalists, British press, a few international wire correspondents who had the particular expression of people who've done 100 of these and are still, somewhere under the professional neutrality, paying attention. The hall filled. I recognized a senator I'd interviewed twice. A minister whose office had never returned my calls. Several Lagos businesspeople who had arrived wearing the specific expression of people who've been invited to something important and want everyone to know they know it. Then, the room shifted. Not a sound. Not an announcement. The shift happens in the body before it registers in the brain, some collective recalibration of attention, every head turning at a slightly different moment but all arriving at the same place. They walked in together. Here is what I want to tell you about that moment, because the photographs don't catch it and the footage flattens it. The room did not explode. It didn't erupt or roar. It went quiet. The specific quiet that is the inverse of noise, fuller than silence, weighted with 1,000 individual reactions all happening simultaneously and canceling each other out into something that felt, from inside it, like held breath. William acknowledged the room with a nod that landed somewhere between formal and genuine, the kind of nod that's aware of itself without being self-conscious about being aware of itself. If that sounds like a contradiction, it's because the thing itself was. Catherine was a fraction behind him, then, beside him, and, then, this is the part one keep coming back to, she looked up at the gallery. Not performing. Not scanning for cameras. Just looking, the way a person looks when they want to understand the actual dimensions of a space. Her eyes moved across us. They didn't land on me. Of course they didn't. But, for a half second, I had the completely irrational sensation that they almost did, and something about that they almost hit me somewhere behind the sternum in a way I have no clean explanation for. The formal reception proceeded with the stateliness these things require. Speeches were given. The host acknowledged the historical weight of the visit without drowning in it, which is harder than it sounds. There is a very specific tightrope being walked when two countries with the history that Nigeria and Britain carry stand in a room together and try to speak toward a future. Too much acknowledgement of the past and you're dragging both parties into an accounting that the ceremonial context can't hold. Too little and the room knows, and the knowing sits in the air like smoke. The Nigerian official who spoke found the line. He didn't avoid the weight. He carried it briefly, set it down visibly, and then said something that I wrote in full in my notebook. We are not here because history was clean. We are here because we intend for what comes next to be better. The room responded, not applause exactly, more the sound a room makes when something true enters it. William was watching the speaker with the focused stillness of someone who's been trained to receive information in public without reacting to it, but who is, nonetheless, receiving it. There was something in the set of his jaw that read to me, though I'm only a journalist and not a mind reader, like recognition. The specific expression of someone hearing something said that they had perhaps said privately to themselves. I could be wrong. I often am. But I wrote it down anyway. The joint walkthrough of the hall afterward was where the prominent roles framing started to make visible sense. They separated briefly, William to a cluster of government officials, Catherine to a group that included several women from the maternal health initiative she'd visit later that morning. And, watching them work separate sides of the same room, you understood what the palace meant. This was not one of them being the primary and the other being the gracious accompaniment. Catherine was in a full conversation, not smiling and nodding, an actual conversation, the kind where you lean slightly forward and the other person leans slightly back because they've just said something and they're waiting to see where you go with it. She gestured once with her hand. The woman she was speaking to laughed, not the polite laugh of social obligation but the caught-off-guard laugh of someone who's been said something genuinely funny by someone they hadn't expected to be funny. I couldn't hear what was said. I'd have given my recorder for it. Across the room, William had his hand briefly on the arm of an elder statesman, the touch of acknowledgement, of I hear you, landing for maybe a second and, then, releasing. The elder statesman's expression after was complicated. Not moved, exactly. Not unmoved. Something in the middle of those two things that doesn't have a word I know. The thing about watching this kind of event as a journalist is the discipline it requires. Not the discipline of not reacting, you're allowed to have a reaction, you're allowed to be human, but the discipline of not letting your reaction do your reporting for you. I've been in rooms where something felt significant and wasn't. I've been in rooms where something felt routine and turned out to matter enormously in retrospect. The feeling in the room is data, but it's not the story. You have to hold both, what you're experiencing and what you're observing. I kept both notepads in my head the whole morning. The observational one, schedule proceeding on time, both principals engaged, security unobtrusive, media access controlled but not adversarial, crowd outside perimeter larger than anticipated. The experiential one, something is happening here that I do not yet have the language for. I ate lunch in the press vehicle, a rice and beans takeaway from a stall outside the perimeter gate, which was 1,000 times better than the catering inside the event, because that is the eternal truth of Nigerian street food and palace receptions. Adiz called from Lagos. How is it? I paused. It's more than I thought it would be. More how? I looked out the window at the city going about its afternoon. I'll tell you when I know how to say it, I said. She accepted that, because she's been my colleague for 6 years and she understands that sometimes that's the most honest answer. The driver started the engine. The youth forum was in 2 hours. I pulled out my notebook and read back what I'd written all morning, the observations, the quotes, the small physical details I trained myself to capture before they evaporated. At the bottom of one page, in the margin, I'd written a single word without noticing I'd written it. Careful. I didn't mean it as a criticism. I meant it the way you mean it when you're watching someone carry something irreplaceable across a room. With that particular, quiet hope that they don't drop it. The youth forum was held in a venue that had clearly been chosen with some care. Not a government hall. Not a grand convention space. A medium-sized auditorium at a university just outside the city center, the kind of place where the seats are a little worn and the acoustics do something complicated with the sound in the back rows and the air conditioning works at approximately 60% capacity, which in Abuja meant the room was warm in a way that felt lived in rather than uncomfortable. That choice, that specific, deliberate choice of venue, was the first thing I noted when I walked in. Someone had decided that prominent roles in the context of this forum meant the room couldn't feel like a throne room. The young people in the audience were not props in a photo opportunity. They were the point. You felt it the moment you sat down. About 400 young Nigerians, ages 18 to 30, from every region. Students, entrepreneurs, artists, NGO workers, athletes. A young woman 2 seats down from me in the press section had a hand-painted sign she'd been told she couldn't hold up but was sitting on her lap anyway, face down, as a personal protest against the instruction. I liked her immediately. The energy in the room was the energy of people who have been waiting to be asked a question for a long time and are determined not to waste the chance. There's a specific Nigerian hunger for being seen that I think gets misread from the outside as aggression or performance. It's neither. It's the very reasonable response of a generation that is extraordinarily talented, living in a system that chronically underestimates them, finally, in a room where someone at the front has ostensibly come to listen. Whether that listening would be real or performed was what everyone in the room had come to find out. William spoke first. I'll tell you something about William's public speaking that I didn't expect. It has the texture of someone who was trained to do something but has gradually made it his own. The formal cadences are still there, you can hear the years of official functions in the rhythm, but underneath it, something more direct has broken through. He didn't lead with pleasantries or a prepared narrative about Nigeria's potential that could have been written for any country on the continent. He led with an acknowledgement. Not a historical accounting, he wasn't there to perform atonement and the room wasn't there to receive it, but a specific, present-tense acknowledgement that the relationship between their 2 countries had not always served Nigeria, and that he understood the expectation in the room was not goodwill gestures but genuine engagement. The auditorium went very still. Not the held breath still of the State House. A different kind. The still of people recalibrating their expectations midstream. He didn't linger. He said it, let it sit for exactly as long as it needed to, and moved forward. Smart, I wrote in my notebook. Structurally, emotionally smart. Catherine spoke after him, and, where William's register was measured to careful, considered, the words of someone who has learned the cost of careless speech, hers ran slightly warmer, slightly faster. Not less precise. A different instrument. She talked about the maternal health initiative she'd visited that morning with a specificity that told you she'd been paying attention, not just present, actually paying attention. Names of the women she'd met. A statistic that I'd seen in my own research but that landed differently when she said it with the context she'd gathered firsthand. Something about the moment of birth being the most dangerous hour for too many Nigerian mothers, and how that number was not inevitable, and how the women she'd sat with that morning already knew exactly what was needed and were doing it with insufficient resources. They don't need to be told what the problem is, she said. They need the backing. The woman next to me, an NGO health worker, I gathered from her badge, exhaled in a way that sounded like something releasing. Then, the questions began. And, this is where the story stopped being the story I thought I was covering. The moderator had a list. Pre-selected questions, vetted, structured. the machine doing what the machine does to contain the unpredictable variable of actual human beings in a room with feelings and opinions and decades of accumulated experience of being spoken about rather than spoken to. The first few questions went through the list. Good questions. Solid answers. Then, a girl in the fourth row raised her hand. She was maybe 22. Natural hair pinned back, wearing a yellow blazer over a white shirt, the blazer the kind of bright that you choose because you intend to be visible. The moderator looked at his list. Looked at her. Looked at his list. She kept her hand up. There was a pause that lasted maybe 4 seconds and felt like 4 years. Then, William said, "Yes, please," and nodded at her. Her name was Zara. She told them her name first, which I thought was an act of courage that registered on her face as something else, calm. Just calm. She was from Kano. She ran a small enterprise building water filtration systems for rural communities in the Northwest. She'd been doing it for 3 years with money she'd pooled from grants, family, and one very ill-advised personal loan that she mentioned with a laugh that the room recognized and returned. And then, she asked her question. She asked it not at William, not at Catherine, but at the space between them, at the them of it, which I thought was entirely intentional. "When you go back," she said, "and you're in your room or you're having dinner, whatever it is you do when the cameras are off and no one is watching, are you going to remember us? Not the report. Not the brief. Us. The specific people in this room today. Are we going to stay in your heads?" The room did not breathe. I've been in press rooms for almost a decade. I know what happens when someone asks a question that punctures the ceremonial skin of an event, the panic in the handler's eyes, the slight stiffening of the principal's posture, the microsecond calculation. I watched that microsecond happen. And then, I don't know how else to say this, something settled in both of them. Something fell away. Not the composure remained. But, the layer of performance that is always there, always has to be there in these contexts, thin enough to see through. William looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. And then, after a beat that he used well, "I don't know how to prove that to you from here. But, yes." Catherine had turned to look at him when he spoke. When he finished, she turned back to Zara. "What you described, the filtration systems, the loan, the 3 years, that's already in my head," she said. "That's not going to leave." A pause. "But, I also hear what you're really asking. And, I think you deserve a better answer than a promise made in a room full of cameras. I think you deserve to see it in what happens after." Zara nodded once. Measured. The nod of someone who has been in enough rooms to know the difference between what people say and what they do, and who is filing this moment accordingly. The room released its breath. I wrote for maybe 5 solid minutes without looking up. My hand was doing the thing it does when I'm covering something that matters, where the pen moves faster than the thought and you end up with a page of shorthand that you'll spend an hour decoding later, and in the moment that feels exactly right. When I finally looked up, the forum was continuing, more questions, more exchange, the machine resuming its programmed flow, but the room had changed in the way rooms do when something unscripted has passed through them. Looser. Warmer. Everyone slightly more themselves. The girl in the yellow blazer was in a conversation with a press aide after the formal session ended. Not deferential. Equal. Her hands moving as she spoke, the yellow blazer catching the light. I thought, she came here to be visible. She was. I thought, she asked the one question nobody on any official list would have written. I thought, and they answered it with something that cost them something. A specific answer for a specific person in a specific room on record, with no way to walk it back. Whether that cost means anything will depend on what happens in the months that follow. That's not cynicism. That's journalism. But, the moment itself, the unscripted minute in the fourth row, was as real as anything I'd seen all day. Maybe more. I walked out of the auditorium into the Abuja afternoon, the heat arriving like a physical statement of fact after the 60% air conditioning, and I stood still for a moment outside the doors. A group of young people from the forum spilled out around me, already deep in conversation, already processing, already doing the thing Nigerian young people do that is one of the things I love most about covering this country. They don't wait to be told what something meant. They decide. She asked it though, one of them was saying, gesturing. She asked it for all of us, said another. And, they actually, yeah. A beat. Yeah. I didn't write that down. I didn't have to. That conversation was going to happen 1,000 more times in 1,000 different rooms, and the version I'd heard was just one frequency on a frequency that was already running through the whole city. The driver was waiting by the vehicle at the far end of the courtyard. I checked my phone. 8 missed calls. My editor. I called her back as I walked. Tell me, she said. There was a girl in a yellow blazer, I said. A pause. Start there, she said. I did. The evening reception was at 7. By 5 o'clock, the city had decided the day was significant. Lagos operates on its own sovereign schedule regarding what it chooses to care about, but Abuja had caught the current and was running with it, the compound outside the reception venue already thick with people who had not been invited, who had no expectation of going inside, who were simply there because something was happening and they wanted to be near it. I understand that impulse. I've always understood it. There's a particular human need, not the need to witness history, because you never know something is history while it's happening, not really, but the need to be present during something. To be able to say, afterward, I was in the city that night. I felt the air that was in that air. The people outside the gates were filling that need in the oldest way. The reception hall was the most formally dressed I'd seen all day. Agbada and aso-oak in extraordinary abundance. The Nigerian gift for ceremonial dressing, the way fabric becomes statement, the way color is used as a declaration, had arrived at full volume. I watched a woman in a galley that was architecturally impossible pass through the door and took a photograph with my personal phone because no press brief was going to capture that. The British delegation was in formal dress also, but formal dress reads differently against Nigerian ceremonial dress, and the room navigated this with the particular grace that happens when everyone in it has decided, collectively and without discussion, to be their best selves tonight. I was in a corner near the press pool, which gave me a diagonal sightline to most of the room. My notebook was full enough that I'd started on the back pages, which I almost never do, usually a sign that something is refusing to stay contained. They entered at 7:15. Catherine in a gown that the fashion writers will describe in their own language, but what I'll tell you is that she'd made a choice that was different from the morning's terracotta, deeper. More formal. The kind of choice that says, I understand what tonight is. William beside her, ties reinstated for the evening, the formal codes of the reception respected. What struck me was the pace. In the morning, there had been the measured walk of state occasion. Now there was, not ease exactly, nothing in these contexts is genuinely easy, but something that looked like two people who had gotten through a long, meaningful day and were still upright and present and willing. Something that looked like endurance that didn't resent what it was enduring. They separated almost immediately into the room's various gravitational fields, dignitaries, hosts, cultural figures, and I watched them navigate separately for a while, the way I'd watched it that morning, the two-instrument thing, each playing a different part of the score. An hour in, I lost them in the crowd for about 20 minutes. This is a normal thing at these events, and I used the time to get a plate of food that was, in the way of Nigerian hospitality at formal occasions, extraordinary jollof and peppered fish and a plantain preparation that was doing something complex and emotional that I was grateful for after the adrenaline of the day. I was eating in a corner and talking to a diplomat whose country I won't mention because he was being far more candid than his official position permitted, when I noticed the photograph being taken. Not by a press photographer. By a young man, maybe 19 or 20, who was part of the event staff, a runner or an assistant, wearing the polo shirt of the catering company. He'd flattened himself against the wall near a pillar, phone held at waist height, clearly trying to take a photograph of the room without being seen to do so. He wasn't photographing the principals. He wasn't trying to get a shot that would go anywhere or do anything. He was photographing the room. The whole room. The people and the light and the fabric and the evening. I watched him look at it after he took it, the blue glow of the screen on his face. The expression on his face was the expression of someone who has captured something they want to keep. I didn't speak to him. I should have. I think about it. But I saw his face and I thought, that photograph is going to a family somewhere tonight. Maybe a mother. Maybe a brother. And the caption is going to be something like "I was here" and that will be enough. That will be everything. Near the end of the evening, there was a musical performance, a young artist from Lagos whose name I recognized from the Afrobeat circuit, not yet stratospheric but, heading there, the kind of talent that announces itself before the rest of the world catches up. The choice of that specific artist was another deliberate one. Not the established. Not the already internationally famous whose presence would read as safe and expected. Someone in the ascending moment, being given a stage that might accelerate the ascent. He played 3 songs. William and Catherine were in the audience, not behind a rope, not elevated, seated at the same level as everyone else in the hall. Catherine moved with the music in the small, contained way of someone who was moved but, aware of the context, a quarter-beat nod, a slight forward lean. Genuine. Uncurated. William had a smile that he was, I think, trying to contain and, not entirely succeeding. Which I liked. After the 3rd song, when the room responded, properly, fully, he turned to her and said something. She laughed. Not the performed laugh of public function but, the private language laugh of 2 people who've been together long enough to have built a shorthand for the world. I was too far to hear it. I'll never know what he said. That's fine. Some moments are not for the journalist. I filed at midnight from my hotel room, the report built from everything the day had given me, the State House reception, the forum, the yellow blazer, the unscripted minute, the evening's architectural galley and, its impossible angles, the catering assistant's photograph, the 3 songs. Folake read it in real time. I could tell because her response messages came in a cascade, not the usual single reply but, a series of them, arriving in the rhythm of someone reading and, reacting, good. Good. The girl in the yellow blazer, yes, lead with that. The thing about the mother, yes. Don't cut the music. The last message, after a pause, this is the piece. I turned off my lamp and lay in the dark. Here is what I want to say, at the end of this, that didn't fit in the formal report. A royal visit is a constructed thing. Everything about it, the schedule, the image, the language, the choreography of who stands where and speaks when, is constructed with enormous care and considerable resources. That's not a criticism. Everything of consequence is constructed. A play is constructed. A cathedral is constructed. The construction doesn't make the thing inside it false. What I watched all day was 2 people carrying a weight that I think they understand more fully than they're permitted to say in public, the specific weight of representing a complicated inheritance while trying to move towards something better, in a country that has every reason to watch them with the skepticism it has earned. They didn't dissolve that skepticism. You can't dissolve that kind of thing with a 2-day visit. Nobody who was in that forum believed otherwise. But, Zara in the 4th row asked them the real question, are you going to remember us? And, they answered it with their names attached. On record. In a room full of people who will hold them to it. That's not nothing. That might be the only thing that matters. The flight back to Lagos the next morning was early enough that the city was still half asleep when the vehicle took me to the airport. The roads were quiet in the Abuja way, different from Lagos quiet, more deliberate, the wide roads holding the silence easily rather than straining against it. I watched the city pass outside the window. I thought about my mother saying be present. I thought about Zara's raised hand. I thought about the boy in the polo shirt, the blue glow on his face, keeping the room for someone who wasn't there. I thought about what the word prominent had been trying to tell me all along. Not prominent as in elevated above. Prominent as in forward. Present. In the room, carrying the weight, doing the work in full view of people who had seen too much performance and needed to see something real. Whether it was real, whether it becomes real and what follows, is a question I'll still be asking in a year, in 5 years, in however many years the work of that visit generates or fails to generate. But, for now, For one day in Abuja, with the yellow blazer and the 3 songs and the cathedral-wide deli and the catering assistant keeping the evening on his phone, something passed between 2 countries that had a complicated past and an uncertain future, and it passed not in a press release or a diplomatic communique, but in a room. Between people. In real time. My mother would have stopped to watch. So did I.